Okay, so moving right along with part 3, we can get started on building our base here. So I'm going to start out with a cylinder, and of course it comes in, it's a little too long, so we're just going to squeeze that down a little bit, and the height here, we'll just take it to something like maybe 15. That should be good. And what I want to do is I want to center this cylinder that's going to be the base for this swivel mount, and I want to center it directly underneath the pitch point, because when we go to rig this, it needs to be centered. So we can play around in the viewport and try to center it as best as we can, or we could just use a very simple command, which is the reset PSR. So what we want to do is we want to determine what object needs to go where. So we want this base to be centered directly where this pitch point cylinder is. So here's the pitch point, and here's the cylinder. So let's take the cylinder and make it a child of the pitch point, and then use the reset PSR, which stands for position, scale, and rotation, and we'll click that. And now the cylinder has now been placed directly where the pitch point is at. So if you don't know how to get to that command, you go to Character and come down here to Reset PSR. So now we can just take the cylinder and drag it out from being a child of the pitch point object, and now we can drag that down on the y-axis and it will stay centered directly below the pitch point. So all I want to do now is just scale this up. So I'm just going to take the radius here, and I'm going to go out with that until it lines up. Now the problem here is that this is going to look kind of weird, because the cylinder of course is round, but these places here, these side brackets, are not rounded, they're actually just straight. So we may have to do a little correction here with the geometry. So let's take the radius up, maybe something like that, and you know, that actually doesn't look all that bad. I think we can just leave it like that. That will look pretty good. Okay, so we want to go ahead and maybe give this some more subdivisions. So I'm going to take it up to about 50. That'll just kind of give a more rounded look to it. And we want to make it editable. Go into point mode, optimize it, and change the Phong angle down to 25. I want to go into polygon mode. And what we want to do is select the bottom polys, use a extrude inner, and we'll just extrude that down a little bit, extrude in again, and now we want to determine the main rod that's going to be the support rod. So what we want to do is extrude, and we'll pull that down, and this will determine how high the gun is actually going to be up off the ground. So we're going to build some legs on this later, but for right now I think that looks pretty good. That's enough height, and if you actually want it to be more, then you can actually come back and grab hold of those polygons and drag them down or back up to lengthen or shorten your rod here for the base. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. We've got our base set up, and if anything, we can probably go to line mode and make a loop selection and just kind of round out those corners. Bevel it with a subdivision of 3, and the type needs to be convex, and we'll just click and drag and just give a little rounding to those corners. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, when I'm modeling, what I usually like to do is pull everything up above the grid. And that's just my preference. Although you don't really have to if you don't want to, but that's what I like to do. So I'm just going to select all of the objects, and you can do that by just selecting the first one and then shift selecting the last one, or you can just draw with a live selection inside and just select them all. And I'm just going to pull those up to about there. Now everything is up above the grid and you can see it a little better. Okay, so now what we want to do is set up just a basic leg system here, and I figured maybe what we could do is just build 3 legs, and that should be plenty. So we wanted to take our cylinder, and what we want to do is just make another cylinder. So I'm just going to alt-click the cylinder with this main cylinder here selected. And this one here we're going to rename to base stand, and this one here we'll rename in a few minutes. So I'm going to pull this one down, and the thickness I'll just take it to something like 12. And just a little tip to keep in mind when you are making adjustments in your attributes here, and this goes for basically any object, even if you're down here in the coordinate system, and you'll notice that you've got, say for example, the height here is set to 12 centimeters. Well, if for some reason you want to change it to, say, maybe 100, so you're going to type in 100, click OK, it goes to 100. Well, if you accidentally don't select everything when you're deleting it, and say you only catch the C and the 100, and you enter, say, 250, well, instantly now you've got 2 extra zeros that are added onto it. So just be sure that when you delete these values out of these attributes here, that you select the CM as well, or just don't even select it, just select the numbers there, and that will keep it from actually going way beyond where you want it. Sometimes I catch myself not selecting everything there, and you end up with a very large value. And another way to get around it is just to double click the attribute, and it will select everything for you. Okay, so I'm just going to give this some more subdivisions, the rotational segments here. And we'll pull that up. And you know, to be honest, let's do this a different way. Let's keep it all one piece of geometry. So let's take the cylinder and just get rid of it. There's no need in trying to introduce more geometry here. We can just work with what we've already got. So we'll take the base stand and we'll go into polygon mode, and we'll use the knife tool set to loop. And we want to make a cut about there, and we'll use the loop selection tool to make a set selection, and then we'll just do an extrude, and we'll extrude that out maybe about to there. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now we want to build a stand of some sort, and we may want to go with something like, I don't know, I was thinking maybe 3 legs to it, but in this case, if this gun were to really be real, you're probably going to want more than 3 legs. Otherwise, it may tip over just from the force that this gun is going to start producing. So what I'm going to do is make sure that the base stand is selected, and I'm going to alt-click a cube, drag that base stand out, and now we got a cube that's centered, and I'm going to drag the cube down here, and this cube is going to be the beginning point for our mount that we're going to make. And what I want to do is bring it down to, say, let's just go with 100 by 100, maybe something like that. Maybe we'll make it a little thicker, so let's try 25. So the idea we're going to do with this cube is that it's going to sit right here on the bottom of this pole, this extrusion that we made, and it's going to kind of branch out, and when it does, it's going to be the support for the legs, and the 4 legs will come off of each one of these 4 faces of this cube. So I think maybe what we want to do is make this a little thicker, so maybe something like 55, because a base for a minigun isn't going to be made out of flimsy, thin layered steel. It's actually going to be pretty thick. Okay, that looks good. So we'll take the cube and we will make it editable, and we don't need to optimize the cube because it does not come with caps, so there's no need to optimize anything. So what I'm going to do, go to point mode, and I'm going to choose the knife tool again. Make sure you're set to loop mode, and what we want to do is make some cuts here. And you know, now that I think about it, I think we may be able to get away with just making some inner extrusions. We could do it with a knife tool in order to cut some loop cuts for us, but I think we can do this with the inner extrusion. So let's do a loop selection around those middle polygons, and we want to go to extrude inner. Now we have it set to a maximum angle of 120, and if we do that, you can see what we're getting with that inner extrusion. Well, that's not what I want. What I want to do is I want each one of these faces to extrude and come inward to produce its own face. So we need to take the maximum angle back down to about 89, which is the default setting, and now we're getting each one of those faces to have its own separate polygon selection on each side. Okay, so we'll go to point mode, and we need to go to a side view, and I want to make these look more like a cube or a square. Right now you can see this looks more like a elongated rectangle, so be sure only select visible elements is off with your rectangle selection tool, and we want to select just this inner row of this loop here of points, and we'll go grab the scale tool and we'll scale that to make it look more like a cube. Doesn't necessarily have to be perfect. So now we want to do the same coming from a front view, and we want to select these points here, and we want to scale those in as well. So we'll go back to polygon mode, and those faces are still selected, and now we just want to extrude those out. So maybe, yeah, I guess maybe that is good enough. Alright, so now since we have those, now we need to determine how we want to build the leg. Do we want to make some more extrusions and then have the legs come down and extrude to kind of round them out, or do we want to just build with separate geometry? Well, actually what we could do is build with separate geometry, but we can actually use a spline and use a sweep NURB to build the leg. So what we'll do is I will just do an extrude inner to kind of punch a hole into all 4 of these extrusions that we just made, like so, and then we'll go to a front view, and I want to go into point mode, and I want to go grab a spline. And for something like this, we'll just use a linear spline, and we want to determine exactly how tall or how long are these legs going to be. So if we say here is the grid, and if that's going to act as the ground, then this gun is actually going to be sitting kind of low to the ground. And that's not really a bad idea. It's actually kind of a low profile, so maybe we'll just go with that. So what I'll do is I'm going to draw the way I want my leg to appear. And I've got some points selected, so I'm just going to click out here just to deselect those. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a leg using the linear spline, And it's going to start here in this socket that we just made, and it's going to come out, and then it's going to go down. So right now this axis handle is in the way, so I'm going to hit Alt-D to take that away. I'm going to go grab a linear spline, and I'm going to start about here. I'm going to come out to maybe there, and then we'll just bring this down to maybe something like there, and then from there we'll bring it down to the ground level. Okay, so there is our leg. Now remember I told you in a previous video that when you draw a spline from one of those side angles, it's going to show up at the world center. So you see this spline did not show up here in the socket where we thought we were drawing it from. It actually showed up in the center, so we're going to have to move that over. But right now what I want to do is concentrating on building this spline and kind of smoothing it out. So we need to determine the shape of what this leg is going to look like. So I want it to be a beveled square shape. So I'm going to use a rectangle spline, and of course right now that is way too big, because if we grab the sweep nerd and we drag these two splines into the sweep nerd, you can see just how huge that leg is. So to fix that, we take this rectangle spline and we pull the profile of it down. So the width and the height we just take down. So let's try 35 by 35. So now we need to grab the sweep nerd, and of course you can't grab it because the axis handle has disappeared, so we need to hit Alt-D to bring that back. And now we'll just pull that over, and you can see that it's actually a little too big for that socket. So we need to go back to the rectangle spline and make some adjustments to the height. No, actually it's going to be the width. Okay, so now that fits perfectly into that socket. And what we want to do is disable the sweep nerd, go back to point mode, and grab hold of this first spline here that we drew. And I don't really necessarily want these to be such a sharp linear angle. So I'm going to select this one here, and I'm going to go over here to the chamfer command. Now of course again I've got it in a toolbar, but to get to it you go to Structure, Edit Spline, Chamfer. So I'm going to call up that command, and here's the attributes for it, and it's basically like this. The radius determines how far this point is going to be beveled. So with a bevel of 5 we just hit apply, and that really didn't take it too far. So I'm going to hit Control Z to do an undo, and I'm going to take the radius to something like 25. We'll click apply. That still didn't do it enough, so let's take it up to something like 75. Hit apply again, and you can see here what it's doing. It's rounding out that corner. So let's turn the sweep nerd back on, take a look. Okay, it probably needs to be a little bit more. So we'll just hit undo a couple of times, which is Control Z, and we'll take this up to 100. Hit apply. Okay, so that looks pretty good for there. Now we want to go here and do the same for this one, and we want to call up the chamfer command, and let's try a radius of 100. Hit apply. And there we go. Now that looks really good. That's actually rounded now. So we'll deselect those points, turn the sweep nerd back on, and that looks pretty good. Now I want to get rid of some of these sharp, hard edges along the corners of this leg. So to do that, we'll just grab the rectangle spline and enable the rounding option. And of course it's set to a whole lot here by default, so we need to take the radius and bring that down. So we'll take it to maybe something like 3. Now you can see there is a whole lot of subdivision in there, and that's actually kind of unnecessary. So what we want to do is take this angle option here, and we want to start playing with this here. So let's take this up, and it looks like an angle of 15 actually looks pretty good, because you don't want to go too high, otherwise you're going to start losing your subdivision in there, and then it's not going to look right. So we'll just go with an angle of 15, and that should work out pretty good. Alright, now we want to determine what we want to do with these bottom areas here that we're going to use for the leg for the ground. But first you'll notice there's a cap there, and the cap looks like it's triangulated. So let's click on the sweep nerve and go to cap, and for the start and end we'll just choose none. And now we've got an empty hole there, and that's fine because the camera's not going to be able to see the empty hole on this side, nor will it be able to see that hole there, so that's not really a concern. So the only problem I'm concerned with right now at the moment is the fact that the base is not sitting flat on the ground. It's actually angled. So what I want to do is I want to take this here and turn it to flatten it so it will sit flat on the ground. Now there's one way you can do it. You can make your sweep nerve editable and then grab that row of points and turn them and twist them, but then the leg is going to get bent out of shape and it's just not going to look right. So what we'll do to fix this is to turn off the sweep nerve, go back to your main spline, and what we want to do is right click and we want to choose add point. So what we'll do is we'll add a point about halfway between here and there, so say maybe right about there. And then what we'll do is we'll take this bottom point here and we'll pull it over and line it up with that one. And then we'll take this one and we'll use the chamfer tool on it again. And instead of with a radius of 100, let's do something like maybe 25. We hit apply, and now that's rounded out. And now when we turn our sweep nerve back on, now we've got our leg that's sitting flat. However, right here in this corner, it looks like we may have some intersecting polys from a distance, but it looks like it's going to be okay there. You got to be careful about that when you're doing these corners and these bends with the sweep nerve, because you can actually get these polygons to start intersecting, and then you're going to have a mess, and then your geometry is just going to look like crud. So that actually worked out pretty well. We didn't have to really make any adjustments there. Alright, so there's our leg. So we're just going to quickly build a base for this. So what I'll do is one thing we could do is just make the sweep nerve editable and then just make some extrusions along the base here. Or you could take a cube and take the cube over, or a cylinder or whatever. In this case, we're just going to use a cylinder and place it over here on the end of the base. So we'll take our sweep nerve and we'll do a Alt click for a cylinder, and be sure to take your sweep nerve out of there. Take the cylinder, we'll go to a top view, and we'll pull the cylinder here over to the end of that leg. And we'll give it a thickness of about 8. Just round that off to the nearest number. And we'll pull that up like so. And there's our leg. Now if you want to, you can make it editable. We'll optimize it. And we'll change the Fong angle down to about 25. And we'll make some extrusions. Maybe something like that, just to kind of give it a little detail. And then we'll round it out by going into line mode. And we'll bevel these edges like so. Okay, so now all you have to do is take your cylinder, which we're going to call this, let's see, what should we call it? We'll just call it foot, because that's going to be the foot pad, actually. Foot pad for the ground. We'll make that a child of the sweep nerve. Whoops. That's not what I wanted to do. Let's select the sweep NURB, and what we'll do is we'll alt-click a null object, and we're going to rename this object to leg, and we'll drop the foot pad as well as the sweep NURB inside of this leg. So now we can take this leg and control click and drag, and then just rotate it with the H 90 degrees, and then all we have to do is do that 2 more times, and that will be our legs for this minigun. However, seeing as how we haven't textured it yet, I'm going to delete the copy and only keep one leg here for this, and that's because I want to be able to texture this first leg, and then we can make copies of it. That way we don't actually have to go through and texture all 4 legs. We can just texture the first one and then go through and copy it. It'll just make it a whole lot quicker. Alright, so that concludes this part, and we're going to keep on going in the next part with some more modeling.